Hey guys, Prowl 1701 here, and today we're going to talk about the Cybermen. And my question is, what do you think is the weakest or worst, or just possibly your least favorite, as those can be three different things, Cyberman story? Especially which one you think may be the weakest. Now, for that, I do think there is an obvious answer. So we're going to discuss that one. And then we're going to talk about the weakest besides that one. Because I do think it's a pretty obvious answer for which one's the weakest. I think most people would agree it's the Wheel in Space. Partially just because of the missing episodes, I think. With only episodes 3 and 6 existing. Which I'm grateful the final episode exists. You guys know that's a big thing for me. I like when the final episode exists. But the recon's also a little hard to get through, having watched the Wheel in Space not too long ago for the first time. And it was a bit hard to get through, actually. I loved the surviving episodes well enough, but the recons were a bit rough. And the story's not quite as good. I can't even remember what the Cybermen's actual plan was. Was it much of a plan? Do I look like a guy with a plan? I just think overall it probably is the weakest 60s story. Again, with the missing episodes factoring into that, I can certainly see why most people would pick that one. It seems like the easy answer. I think it's the only 60s Cyberman story you could call not good. For me, it's okay. I found it a little underrated, but not overly great. But I could see it being the weakest. Now, my question that's a little more challenging is, what story would you call the next weakest? If you took the Wheel in Space out of the equation, which 60 stories would you call the weakest? I think that leaves, what, the 10th Planet, the Moon Base, Tomb of the Cybermen, and the Invasion? Which one would you call the weakest of those? I'm going to go with an unlikely choice, because there is one of those stories I feel gets too much praise, and that is Tomb of the Cybermen I would call the weakest, from a story standpoint, because I feel like not a lot happens. Like, I find Tomb of the Cybermen a little boring. I feel like it gets more attention than it deserves because it's the only 60s complete Cyberman story. And because it's kind of a good entry point into the Troughton era for people who are new to Classic Who or new to 60s Doctor Who, black and white Doctor Who. It is a good entry point, especially for Troughton's era. If you want to show someone, especially a younger person, a Troughton story, it's one of the only two complete 4-parters he has, this and the Crotons. And the Crotons, I know, while I'm a huge fan of the Crotons, I know it's not everybody's cup of tea. I can also see where people might think it's a little boring. And most people would go with this. You don't want to give them something like the War Games, which is 10 parts. Or even some of the other stories like Enemy of the World. I don't think it would be a good entry point. I feel like Tomb of the Cybermen is a good entry point, because it's 4 parts, and because it has Cybermen in it, which is a villain, of course, they will be familiar with modern Who. So because of those 2 points, I feel like Tomb gets a little more attention than it deserves. I think it's good. I don't think it's great. I think it's overrated. Much like when it was originally found. Back in the early 90s, when Tomb was originally recovered, people finally got to see it for the first time in years, or for the first time. It actually was very underwhelming for people. A lot of people were disappointed. It did not live up to the mythical status it had achieved because, as J&T says, the memory cheats, and then word of mouth of it had built it up for people who had never seen it. So just going from the audios and the books, it had been built up to this monumental status. And when it came out, it couldn't live up to that. It was very underwhelming for people, very disappointing for people, very overrated for people. I mean, the Cybermen outfits aren't that impressive. They're a huge step back from the 10th Planet. I much prefer the 10th Planet outfits. It felt like the outfits were made a little more kid-friendly here, whereas in the 10th Planet, they could be a little scary, a little body horror. They feel like they were made a little more rated G or PG here. The voice I don't care for in Tomb of the Cybermen, because half the time I can't understand what they're saying. And then for me, the story just spends a lot of time not really going anywhere. I never feel invested in the story here. Now, it has some great moments. The conversation between the Doctor and Victoria about her dad is phenomenal. Great character moment for the second Doctor. I like the guest cast well enough. I enjoy the iconic imagery of the Cybermen waking up and going back to sleep. That's very iconic. But I just don't get as into Tomb as I do other Cybermen stories like The Invasion, The Moon Base, and The 10th, I can't ever decide with the 10th planet, because the first half of the 10th planet is so much better, and the second half kind of lets it down for things that were beyond their control. Hartnell getting sick, episode 4 being missing. I feel like the 10th planet is a better story, though. Like, as a story, it works better, whereas the story for Tomb of the Cybermen is more just, we want to bring the Cybermen back because they're the second Doctor's villains now that we can't use the Daleks anymore, so just throw them in there. The story just kind of, to me. I feel like if there were more complete Cybermen stories in the 60s, or if this one was just not quite complete, I don't think it would be regarded quite as highly as it is. Like, I wish they would find those episodes of the Moon Base, or the Invasion, or episode 4 of the 10th Planet, just so those stories could get a sense to shine more. Because I prefer, especially the Moon Base, I just think the story's better. I like it better. I think it's more fun. I love Troughton's performance even more in it. It's one of the best Cybermen stories to me. And the Invasion, while I understand the argument you can make that it's not as much it is a Cyberman story, but the Cybermen aren't as heavily featured in it as they are in some stories, that the first half of it's more a Tobias Vaughn story, with the Cybermen coming in the second half. I get that, but I also like the twist that it is the Cybermen halfway through. I mean, it's not called the Invasion of the Cybermen, it's just the Invasion. So I like when it's revealed as the Cybermen. It's kind of a nice little twist at the end of episode 4. I enjoy that. Plus, of course, it has the iconic imagery of the Cybermen walking around what I'm assuming is London and coming out of the sewers. That's really cool, very iconic. So I enjoy that a lot as well. I just feel like those stories, from a purely story standpoint, a narrative standpoint, are just better stories. Even the 10th Planet, despite the problems it has, I think it's a better story. Whereas Tomb of the Cybermen, the story is just kind of meh to me. I mean, the settings look fine without blowing me away. The Cybermans look fine without blowing me away. And the guest cast I enjoy. And it definitely has some memorable moments. But I feel like its reputation carries it far more than the actual story does. It's the one, besides Wheel in Space, I would call the weakest, honestly, of the 60s Cybermen stories, personally. So I want to know what you think. Comment down below and let's talk about it. Don't forget to click the like button, the subscribe button, and all the other fun stuff down there in the description as well. Links to the Patreon, links to the Amazon wish list, links to the Amazon UK wish list, and my P.O. box are all down there if there's anything you'd like to send me to look at and review. I want to give a shout out to Colin Coney, a top tier patron of mine. I appreciate his support, as I do the support of all of my patrons. It's very much appreciated. And I also want to say, as always, thank you for watching.